All right, so why are we here? Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Why are we here? Buyers are likely knocking on your door left and right. I'm sure you guys are getting postcards, emails, cold phone calls, and all of the above. The demographics of these buyers: you have venture capital backed buyers, you have private equity backed buyers, you have family offices, you even have banks out there buying. There are franchises. It's a very interesting time to be a seller. And however, these buyers are going to require a level of professionalism that wasn't required prior to COVID. So what do the multiples look like in our industry right now? First off, we have the traditional multiple of adjusted EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And that's looked at your last 12 months. And they'll put a 3 to 5x on that last 12 months. These are for companies that are $1 million and less of their last 12 months, okay? The next way that we see is a multiple of net revenue. So net revenue is defined. I know our industry has basically zero standards, but how we like to define it is net revenue is your commission, so your management fees plus all of your other ancillary fees, gross cleaning, booking fees, limited damage waivers, stuff of that nature. And buyers are valuing that between a 0.9 multiple and a 1.25 multiple. And lastly, these are for some of the companies that are about 50 units and below, or if a buyer is already in your particular market with the infrastructure. These buyers will pay on a contract basis. They'll pay around 25 to 50% of your contracts or your home's annualized rents. So how that looks is like if a unit does around $50,000 in rents, then they'll pay between $12,500 and $25,000. And that won't all be paid at closing. I'll talk more about structures here in a minute. But that type of deal, let's say it was $20K for that particular contract, a buyer might put down $10K at closing, and another $10,000 about a year later. All right, an example of the EBITDA valuation. So you'll take a look at your net income, and then you will likely have some add backs. Let's say you are the general manager of your company, and that particular market wage for a general manager is $150,000, but you pay yourself $200,000. So you're actually paying yourself above market wages right here. So you'll be able to add back the above market wage that you're paying. You might have some vehicle expenses for your personal life that you run through the company. No judging here, I'm not the IRS. So you can add that back if that is personal. Taxes, they're not particularly supposed to be on your P&Ls. Rent expense, a lot of companies in here, they might own the office through a separate LLC, or you as the owner might own it personally, and then the company rents from you, or you might not charge yourself rent at all. So a buyer would want to layer in what they would pay for market rate rent. So look, we're at an adjusted EBITDA of about $500,000. That's great. That multiple would fall, let's say, around that 4x range. So about $2 million is how that would look. Once again, the standard multiples are between 3 and 5x. What can make for a higher multiple? Pretty straightforward, honestly, like a higher EBITDA. Companies that are north of $1 million and growing, like that's going to help push your multiple higher. A lot of, on the market part, you can't control it completely depending on what market you're in, but like some markets are just much hotter than others. Like there's going to be more buyers interested in the Smoky Mountains than there is in downtown Detroit. It is what it is there. Unit growth, revenue growth, and EBITDA growth, obviously much easier said than done, but units are the actual assets. These contracts with the homeowners are the assets of your company, and buyers want to see units growing year over year. They like to see a report called a units gained, units lost report, and if you're not doing this, you should probably start doing this today. and use a CSV file or Excel spreadsheet and start tracking monthly units gained and units lost. And for the units lost, track the reason for the loss. And you'll want to see how that looks over an entire year. And you can start seeing kind of the reasoning why. And yeah, I call it the unit waterfall. It's very important, very important. Revenue growth as well. Buyers like to look at same-store sales year over year, so looking at each individual home, how it's doing in 19, 20, 21, and 22, and those are all super important. If things are pointing up and to the right, you'll be able to negotiate and command a either higher multiple or better structure. Staff is one of the most important parts of our industry. All of us know that. We wouldn't be here if the staff weren't working their ass off, doing their thing. So having a strong staff will help tremendously. And with that, understanding that like not everybody, money's not falling on trees. So like taking a step back to invest every now and then to take a leap forward with the staff is paramount, super important. And then having strong homeowner contracts are very important as well. I'll talk about those here in a minute. And can companies get above a 5X? Yes, they can. So that's going to depend on several factors, but getting north of $1 million and growth are some of the biggest factors there. Our industry, we are not selling stagnant hotels. We're a 100-unit hotel will always be a 100-unit hotel unless you add more units, unless you build more units, I guess. But these companies, we're fluid companies. So our units are going up, they're going down, they're going all around. So focusing on growth, showing pipeline properties, and when you're adding properties at a very quick pace, sometimes the investment is on the front end, and you don't see the contribution from those properties until several years later. So showing that would be nice, and you can even potentially amortize that investment over the lifetime of the property. Now, net revenue. Once again, this is pretty straightforward from prior. It'll be the commissions plus ancillary fees, gross cleaning fees, damage waiver, booking fees, all of that fun stuff. Typically, we see margins on that around 20 to 30% of your revenues is your EBITDA. So taking right in the middle, about 25%. It's a pretty good industry for margins. So how does this look in terms of a valuation between the different buyers? So it's a cute little circle right here on the left-hand side. We have net revenue of $2 million. The average margin right there is 25%. So their EBITDA is $500K. 4 multiple of $500K is $2 million, which is also a 1 multiple of net revenue. So it's always beautiful when it works out like that. It is all across the board though, but buyers are going to do checks and balances on your company, and they're going to look at how does that look net revenue wise, how does that look EBITDA wise, how do those play together, and if one is wildly off from another, they're going to want to understand why. It's not always a bad sign, it can be a good sign. Maybe you're fantastic at margins, or maybe you're really bad at your margins. So they're going to want to understand that and take a look. Price per unit, like I said, under 50 units. These are typically companies that might be newer, companies that might already be in the market of a larger player, or companies that might not have a positive EBITDA. There's not a standard currently on a price per unit. Like I said, it's typically in that 25 to 50% range of gross rents. Once again, it's very dependent on market location, quality of units, how seasoned are the contracts. As a lot of you know, the first couple of years, year 1 and year 2, the contracts are a lot more volatile than as they get longer. So there might be more contingencies put on the deal if the majority of your contracts are on year 1. All right, what do the structures look like? We typically see between 50 and 75% cash at closing, and 25 to 50% seller note between 1 and 3 years. how does that seller note look? So there's typically a contingency on it that'll be tied to either a revenue, EBITDA, or unit count metric. And they'll want to look at the 12-month period prior to closing and then compare the 12-month period post-closing to that. So if it is a dance, it's a negotiation, so you think what's important to you. If you're really good at biz dev, maybe that's what you want it tied to the unit count. If you're really good at margins, maybe you want it tied to an EBITDA metric. And where this can happen is you can actually have some golden handcuffs here if you like. So if they want to tie it to 150 units, 12 months post-close, let's say that's what you close at, and 12 months post-close you're at 175 units, then yeah, you can actually get a bump in your earnout, which can be pretty nice. And then you can also negotiate because your worry is like, wait, I'm selling my company, but I'm still on the hook for $1 million or something of that nature. But you can negotiate some handcuffs to put on them to where they can't materially change certain parts of the company while they still owe you money. So like if you have XYZ employee that you think is fantastic, you can put stuff in there that they can't fire XYZ employee unless for cause, or they can't materially change your contracts or change the brand name or stuff like that until they pay you out. Once they totally pay you out, they can do whatever the hell they want to do. They can change it to a Piggly Wiggly if they want. Just understand that. Some of the private equity companies are offering some of these rollover opportunities as well. So this can be seen either instead of an earnout or part of an earnout, where if let's say you're a seller and you kind of want to take some chips off the table but not fully retire, then you can take part of that purchase price, a minority stake of that purchase price, and roll it over into the parent company, and then try to work on a role that might work for you moving forward as part of a bigger play. So there's just a lot of interesting, creative things happening right now, and so it's a good time to be, it's really a good time to be in the industry for sure. How to get the best terms, this goes very similar to everything I've been talking about with purchase price. Consistent growth is really important. Employees are paramount here. If you as the owner are not the owner relations person and you have an owner relations person or staff, that's really important to help out with getting good terms and starting to add a general manager and remove yourself from that role will just help in terms of the longevity of how much you would have to work post-close, where you might only have to work post-close for a couple months as opposed to a couple years. All right, buyer demographics. We have the venture capital-backed buyers. These tend to be more focused on revenue and price per contracts. They do also focus on EBITDA, but a lot of them have infrastructure across the entire United States. So they will roll kind of your revenues into their type of P&Ls, and so they don't care as much about your margins with that. So they'll see whatever their margins are and slap that on. They typically are national brands and have brand uniformity across the markets. And they're either running towards the public markets or they're already public today. And some of their acquisitions, they can be a little bit louder. They'll do PR pieces on that. Not saying that's a bad thing, but they have shareholders and they're wanting to show growth kind of quarterly of how that might look. Then you have the private equity groups, private equity backed, family offices. These are more cash flow EBITDA buyers. And they're focusing, at least on their acquisitions in new markets, they're going to be focused on $1 million plus companies or 100 unit plus companies. They tend to be brand agnostic and pretty quiet about their acquisitions. And they're the ones that offer that kind of rollover investment, how that might look. And lastly, we just have some of these larger regional and local operators that that might not be backed by these large institutions. And these people, they might have a big presence in a beach market and they want to grow to a ski market or vice versa. As you all know, the cash flows are very seasonal in this industry, so smoothing those cash flows out can definitely help quite a bit. or it might be an in-market larger player that you've built some rapport and a relationship with, and they might want to tuck you into their infrastructure, their type of company. All right, so we're gonna go through kind of the top 5 buyer specifications right now. And these are like, if you're a seller, like these are the 5 things that I would advise you to like deeply look at, because these are typically the top 5 things that buyers are going to look at. And if you're looking to enter the industry as a buyer, I would advise you to kind of use these during due diligence to make sure that you're making sure the seller is moving in the right direction. So the financials, this is incredibly important. We've seen several deals this year fall apart because the financials were a mess. And a lot of these buyers, what they do is they'll go under contract with you under letter of intent, and then during due diligence, they'll do a quality of earnings report, a QOE, and they hire an outsourced financial firm to come in and do a deep dive on your financials. And they have found some things that have been out of whack. So focusing on your financials is paramount. Making sure that your revenue line items are broken out by the actual revenue that's coming in. You don't need to have one line item that says total income. Please do not have that. Have them broken out, have commissions, have booking fee revenue, have cleaning fee revenue, whatever all the 17 revenues you charge the owners and the guests, hopefully more guest facing than owners, do all of that. And then just below that, have your COGS, your cost of the revenues, the direct cost associated with these. So your cleaning fee cost, your processing fees, all of that stuff. That way you can see what your margins are on those particular revenues and COGS line items. Buyers are also going to want to see that. So you can also then see your take rate. There's some really cool metrics you can look at that we can talk about at another time. But owner rents, they do not have to be or belong on your P&L. These are great numbers to look at, and they need to be in your booking reports. Your PMS has these. It's great to have them, but they're not your revenue. Your P&Ls need to specifically only have your revenue. Your revenue is your commissions plus all of your ancillary fees. Advanced deposits, they also do not need to be on your P&L. Please do not have advanced deposits on your P&L. That'll get you in a world of trouble. And taxes as well. Growth year over year, this goes right back to what I was saying earlier. Buyers are going to request a units gained, units lost report. They're also going to request a same-store sales year-over-year report. So buyers are going to be looking at this. They're going to want to see ADRs, occupancy, RevPARs over a 3-year period. How is it trending? So focusing on this, there are fantastic revenue management software companies out here. In the vendor hall, you can hire some people directly that are fantastic. There's really cool things that you can do with ancillary fees as well. So there's ways to do it, knowing that 2022 is definitely slightly lower than 21. And then they're also going to look at an advanced bookings report versus same time last year. As y'all know, this industry is pretty cool. We get a slight glimpse into the future of our company. So being able to run that advanced bookings report versus same time last year, you can see where you're trending and how things are looking. Then they're going to do a deep dive on your owner contracts. These are the assets of the company. Some of the important clauses that they're going to look at is, are these contracts assignable? Are they transferable? The majority of deals in this industry are asset-based deals. So that means that all the contracts have to be assigned from your LLC to another LLC or whatever entity you're in. So making sure they all are either assignable, or we've seen that if it's silent to assignability, we've seen that be okay as well. I'm not an attorney, so don't tell someone that you heard Jacobie say it on stage. But we've seen deals all across the country, and I've heard many attorneys say that is fine as well. Making sure that these contracts auto-renew is super important. You want to reduce the friction with homeowners. every year. So if they're annual contracts, just make sure they auto-renew. And then, as y'all know, most contracts are cancelable within 30, 60, or 90 days, but make sure there are some owner hooks in there, that advanced bookings they have, that the company is still going to be receiving the commission on those. They'll be looking at longevity of contracts. So start thinking about that. As I said, 1 year and less contracts are more volatile. So trying to kind of fix a leaky bucket if you're losing contracts is very important. The technology stack. The good old technology stack in our industry. So you don't have to have some incredible proprietary, homegrown, home-built technology stack. Leave that to the big boys. But you do need to have some of the best-in-class, off-the-shelf products out there. And how do you find out what is best-in-class? You ask your peers. Talk to companies. If you're afraid to talk to ones that are in your market, talk to ones that are in other markets that are at a point to where you want to be at, and ask them, hey, what is your favorite PMS? Why do you not like this? Why do you like this? What about revenue management? What about channel manager? What about this or that? Like, ask around. People are open about it, and that's going to help incredibly. Buyers are also going to look at direct bookings. Your direct bookings don't have to be at 90%, but they also don't need to be at 10%. So having a diversified distribution of bookings for the guest is very important to buyers. We typically like to see somewhere in that like 40 to 60% of direct bookings is a strong place to be at. Obviously, the more direct bookings you can have, the more control you have of their guests, and the more you can keep them within your ecosystem. And then SEO and marketing, just showing that you're having a proactive approach at gaining more guests and homeowners is vastly important. And lastly, the staffing component. I beat a dead horse on this a little bit, but starting to remove yourself from the owner relations team and from the general manager role is vastly important. And slowly starting to build a leadership team, putting that in place will just help you guys tenfold. It's incredibly important. I know this looks pretty thorough and dense. I apologize, but this can be like a 10-year plan type of thing. Getting some of this stuff in order will just vastly help you in the future. All right, thank you all. Questions? Yes.
On the last slide, it said homeowner shouldn't be calling company owner, but in a kind of a under 15 type purchase, it seems that the owner of the company and the dynamic and the relationship between the owner and the homeowner is critical for that to look good.
Yeah, good point. As you're growing, as you're smaller, like, yes, as the owner, you're going to have to be the brand, you're going to have to be the face, you're going to be wearing 7 to 10 different hats, doing a little bit of everything. My point with this is, as you keep growing, start hiring people for those types of jobs, and one of the important ones is owner relations. If you're gonna sell and you have 15 units, yes, you're going to be the face of that. But a buyer's also just going to do a contract purchase right there. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
On your net, excuse me, on your net revenue, you mentioned taking out the housekeeping and maintenance expense portion to get there. As it comes to housekeeping, how far do you go? Your hot tub maintenance, is that thrown in there on the COG as opposed to an expense line item?
So for the net revenue, the net revenue will, are you talking about valuing the net revenue?
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm talking about the COG portion.
The COGS portion of it?
Right. So do you throw in everything, your linens, your supplies, your hot tub maintenance, aside from the housekeeping itself, and keep that as a COG as opposed to an expense like that?
Yeah, so everybody does it slightly different. and which is another part of our industry that some standards would be great. You can definitely, there are some good kind of vacation rental accountants that can work with you on that, but yeah, I would include as many direct costs associated with that, yeah.
Earlier screen, you said that strong staff is quality attributes versus sale considerations. Can you talk about what you're measuring or what other buyers are measuring for strong staff? What are they looking for?
Yeah, it's a good question. So he's asking if what buyers are measuring for a strong staff. They like to see longevity of staff members, so that's always important. That there's not a lot of churn in staff. They want to understand what the owner's day-to-day and week-to-week role is, how intimately involved and what level of involvement that is. They want to see an owner relations person or team with that actual title and role. They're going to want to see either like a director of ops or a general manager type position. And that can be the owner. I understand that, like, as we grow, like, you have to be that, but eventually as you start reaching that inflection point and getting bigger, they're going to want to see you kind of implement that to where you can be more of that either like visionary type role or something of that nature.
What about like HR practices, like how you manage HR, like whether through third party, HR, registration company, or in-house?
From what we've seen, that hasn't really had much of an effect on the valuation, whether HR is in-house or outsourced or things like that. So, sorry, I can't answer too much to that. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So what are the operations, after the acquisition, what are the operations and the systems that stay intact? Or are there any migrations to the property management system or something?
Yeah, great question. So he asked basically during transition, like how do the softwares migrate, what stays on, what doesn't, all that fun stuff. So you're not gonna love my answer, but it really depends on the buyer. So some buyers, they, typically a venture capital backed buyer, they have either proprietary softwares and stuff of that nature. So what they would do is immediately at closing, they're going to migrate everything onto their softwares and whatever other technologies they're using. Some of the private equity groups or more strategic regionals, they'll either leave everything in place, or what they'll do is after peak season, they'll start figuring out where there are some synergies and efficiencies and start migrating some of that onto either their system or whatever. I'm not gonna lie, definitely buyers do like if you're on the same PMS as them. Like that's just like an easy switch over to that. But yeah, it really depends. Some buyers are like very new to the industry, so like they would love to just use exactly what you're using. Other ones might already have their tech stack built out and they'll slowly transition off. But what we've seen is like buyers have made a lot of mistakes over the years with that, with transitioning the tech stack and transitioning the employees. But I've seen the last 2 years, buyers are doing a much better job at just being slow and like not running and breaking things, if that makes sense.
What's the most preferred PMS system you guys see out there for buyers? Like, what do most buyers like that are on smaller companies or 100 units below?
Yeah, that's a good question. I try to play Switzerland.
I didn't ask you New York, I said, what do the buyers like?
So they like this seller to be on the PMS that they're currently on. The majority of buyers over 250 units are on track. But there are also other very good PMSs.
What's caused deals to fall apart?
Oh, good question. Okay, so kind of outside of the actual company, attorneys have caused deals to fall apart. I'm not joking. It's been wild. We did about 20 deals in the last 12 months, and I would say half of them we were able to recommend an M&A transactional attorney, and the other half the seller's like, no, I've got my buddy that's my attorney, and like sometimes they're great and sometimes they're awful. So that is one of them where an attorney is just like bludgeoned the purchase and sale agreement because they were like a divorce attorney or something, literally had no clue what they were doing in terms of transactional law. So that's definitely one thing we've seen. The financials is a part I mentioned earlier. What a buyer does is they're going to request some initial diligence documents from you guys, and you'll send them some P&Ls, you'll send them some template management agreements, you might send them some booking reports. But like, they might ask some questions about the P&Ls, but they're not gonna dig incredibly deep. Once you execute an LOI with them, so beforehand they're peeking behind the curtain. Once you sign the LOI, they're gonna rip that curtain down and dig super deep into your company. So we've seen once that happens, buyers are finding some really wonky stuff in the financials. And a lot of times the sellers didn't even realize that was in there. So doing that on the front end, talking to an accountant or bookkeeper and understanding what the last 3 years look like. Look at every month, see where there are some outliers and understand where that happens. Lastly is the owner contracts. As we know, the majority of companies in this industry are less than 100 units. We're an industry of SMBs. And I tell owners, like, hey, don't look at one template contract, look at every single one and make sure they're all assignable. We've had deals where the owners thought they were all assignable, and then during due diligence, the buyer found out that 25% of the contracts were not because the homeowners had marked them up. So 25% of the purchase price got put a contingency on it, got put in escrow until we could get written consent from the homeowners. So those are kind of the three that we see.
Good morning. What do you guys see in terms of a multiplier and who gets a high multiplier on the EBITDA?
Yeah, so less than $1 million, we see around a 3 to 5 multiple in the last 12 months. Between $1 million and $3 million, we'll see around 5 to 6.5 type of thing, and then it can go up from there. But it's really dependent on is the unit going up or down growth-wise, unit count-wise, and what does the executive team look like?
How do you show new property values? So if you're in a deal and you've got some new property, what are the sort of, how do those get valued? You said that you could like schedule that maybe over a year or two.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Like how do you show new properties and how could those be valued? Yeah, so there's kind of two ways there. When marketing, like shameless plug, when we market a seller, like we really push like, hey, what does your pipeline look like? Let's focus on pipeline. This is really important. Buyers are going to want to see this growth. So creating an Excel spreadsheet of the pipeline that you're working on and pro forma on what the annualized rents are going to look like are vastly important, because that will either be seen in, we can kind of request a higher multiple, or that can be seen in potential earnouts where we can say, hey, we can try to push that X amount will be released once these either come on board or a year after they perform.
So when you're showing the performance, are you, it's like a qualifier, like your historical accuracy of your performance for comps?
Yeah, I mean, the most data you can show, the better. Like just showing something from AirDNA or transparent might not be the best, but comping it to maybe one of your units in your programs based on either unit mix or area, something like that definitely helps. You want to have as much backup as possible.
What is there a ballpark, say, percentage of the buyer's proceeds that go to advisors and attorneys typically to make it happen?
Is there a percentage of buyer proceeds that go to advisors and attorneys?
Are those paid? Are they a percentage? Are they flat fees?
Our like buy side
Yeah, like,
advisors?
what do you cost?
Yeah. So typically, yes, it would be for an advisor like us, we charge a percentage of the deal, and it's a small percentage, and that's how we work. For the attorney, they're either on some type of retainer or a retainer mixed with an hourly pay, or a flat fee sometimes. Anybody else? Any tough ones?
This is probably not tough, but is there a sweet spot, talking about deals under 100 units? Is there some kind of metric in terms of units or some other metric where you see most of the deals happening, 50 units, 50, 75 units?
Yeah, so typically over 25. Like once it gets below 25, a lot of times buyers just don't want to deal with that because it's so mom and poppy, and there might not be like many systems in place, and like so trying to grow it above that amount I think is pretty important. But in terms of like a buyer coming into a new market, the majority of them are going to want some scale, some density in that market. So like, what is that number? It depends per buyer, but like I would say minimum 25. For a lot of buyers, it's like minimum 50. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever represented a buyer that is in an urban market who has a mix of long-term and short-term rentals and owns everything they manage?
Have I ever represented a buyer or a seller?
Oh, a seller, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's take this one step further. How many does this person own or manage?
450 units, 21 of them are vacation rentals, and the vacation rental business is increasing. 23 units in the next calendar year, so it's a small portion. Vacation rental business is about 12% of the total revenue at this point.
Congratulations. That's awesome. Yeah. What market?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. Okay. Cool. Okay, so have I ever represented a seller doing that? No, I haven't. But in terms of like how would that look? Do you have separate P&Ls for the two different businesses, or are they all operating?
Yeah, we must.
And you own the short-term rentals as well? Is that what you said? Okay, so yeah, so separating those a little bit, like I'm sure, as you know, like the long-term rentals that would trade for a cap rate on your NOI, whatever kind of that market standard is in St. Louis for the type of class of multifamily. For the short-term rentals, we are using another baseball reference. Like I don't even think we're in the early innings of portfolios trading of assets. I think we're in like spring training. Like we're so early on what portfolios of assets trading is going to look like. Now institutional capital is coming into our industry to buy portfolios of homes, and I think that's going to be super cool for the future. And I think it will trade on cap rates, and it's going to be interesting. But they're going to want scale on their initial entrances, and I would say probably in that like 50 plus range of units to kind of enter. But yeah, I think the play would be to package all of that up and sell it off to some type of institution. Sorry, it's not a great answer.
For a typical client size, I'm not sure what that is for you, but 100 to 400 units, let's say. What is a typical funnel for representing the seller? So, how many conversations occur with buyers, how many typically LOI, and the side question, post LOI, what percentage or whatever do you see actually don't execute the transaction?
Yeah, great question. So he's asking kind of the timeline from like initial outreach to buyers, I'm guessing, or at least some.
Not about the timeline,
Oh.
but really about the funnel, like sort of the pipeline of leads, and how many of those actually result in a sale, but kind of along, like the steps along the process, if you will, you know?
Yeah. So it really depends on the size of the company, the market, and all that, based on how many potential buyers there will be. We have a list of, I think, 40 plus buyers that are specifically interested in our industry, and every one of those has a different investment thesis. So I'm not saying that for your particular company there would be 40 interested parties, but there might be 7, or there might be 12, or there might be 18, or there might be 2. It really depends, and that's, we would talk with a particular company and say, hey, once we do a deep dive on you, like, hey, here's where we think you would trade at, here's who we think the buyers are that would be qualified to acquire you. And then, and then we would create the materials for you and then begin initial outreach to those buyers. So let's say it is 10 that are reached out to. Of the 10, depending on a bunch of things, it's typically a 3-week process of some Zoom calls, and we set a bid date and all of that fun stuff. Really depending on the market, you might get 3 to 5 offers, and based on that, we discuss internally for a week or so and figure out how we want to go back. Maybe we want to go back to just one and counter them. Maybe we go back and talk to a couple more. But that takes about another week or 2, and then let's say you go under LOI with one of them. Once you go under LOI, it's typically a 60 to 90-day process from LOI to closing. And once that happens, you're exclusive with the buyer. You can't talk to anybody else, and they're going to be doing some due diligence on you. We can do some due diligence on the buyer as well, and then we'll be doing the closing docs will be sent back and forth, the purchase and sale agreement, so that's when the attorneys get involved.
And how often do you see the failure?
Oh, and failure rate, that's a good question. I think we had 2 deals this year that didn't close in the last 12 months out of 22, so not that high.
We just went through this through an acquisition of like a 40-unit business, and I think the one thing that you shouldn't neglect is if you have a local permit that's hard to get. I think that's the reason why the company was purchased, because that was the only way they were able to obtain a local permit to operate in a local market.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's great, especially with like, hey, what market was that? If you don't mind sharing.
Springs.
Palm Springs, yeah.
So just know your value of your permit. If you've gone through it and there's changes, like add that to the price of the intangible.
Yeah, 100%. And that's seen in more of the markets that have regulations. You do have to navigate those, and especially in Palm Springs, that is a tough market to get into with the high barrier of entry. So yeah, great point. Intangibles do play a large role in this. I think, are we done? Oh, okay, last question.
I'm wondering what actually 2 quick questions, so you'll answer this. Last 3 years, do you include 2020?
Yes.
Okay. When a seller stays in the company, what are they typically doing? What are they being asked to do, and how are they like staying in the company? What capacity?
Yeah, great question. And it's a dance back and forth. So like it depends on the buyer, but if it is one of those things where you roll over equity, typically a buyer likes to see like, hey, what are your current roles? What are those 5 current roles? What are the 2 or 3 that you hate doing? What are the 2 or 3 that you love doing? And let's figure out a way to have you just focus on those, and then let's figure out a way to hire for the 1 or 2 or 3 roles that you don't like doing. And then the kind of go forward pay on that is negotiated. All right, thank you all for your time today.